Right. Well, hello, everybody. This is part 4 of crafting serial fiction. We didn't really know how many parts we were going to be doing of this, but we've got to number 4. And today we're going to be looking at audiences, how to find them, in theory, what to do with them once you've found them, and how community can kind of build and evolve around what you're doing. In previous parts, which you can find over on the newsletter, we've talked about like the history of serial fiction, planning it before you get started, and then the sort of writing process when you're in the thick of it and putting chapters out, whether it's on your newsletter or on Wattpad or Royal Road or something like that. So yeah, today we're assuming you've been doing some writing, you've published some stuff, and the next step is like, where are those pesky readers? And this is in some ways the big question. So I think it's the one that everyone always wants to know, like, where do you find readers? How do you build your audience? Because even if you're not massively into like trying to grow your newsletter and do the big hustle thing, like you still probably want some people to read your stories, because most people, I think, even if we love just the process of writing, the completing the circle is when someone actually reads it. Finding people to read stuff is harder than than we'd like sometimes. So I think to kick off, like the big fundamental question, I think for me anyway, is to think about what your publishing model is. Like, how are you actually doing it? Because that has such a big impact on how you go about finding people, that you kind of have to address that first. And there's no right or wrong way of going about this, but if we talk about what we do, Sally, like just as an example, like do you want to outline, because obviously you have your serials, but like what other stuff do you publish, and how does like the SE Read portfolio like slot together?
Yeah, I think so. When I first started Tailbones, which is my fiction newsletter, I did have kind of a bit of a sit down with myself about like, what is it that I actually want out of this? Like, what's the goal? And of course, when you're first starting out, you don't necessarily know what results you want to have, but like, I wanted at least to know, like, what is it that I want out of all this? And I really wanted to focus as much as possible on getting as much fiction out as I possibly could, and hoping that people would read it, and eventually, being able to publish, being able to do some of the things I wanted to be able to do. And so because of that, I really tried to center my newsletter around the fiction and the writing of it and the organizing of it, because I wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to find my fiction. Not long after I started Tailbones, I kind of lucked into the concept for something I call Tailstack News. And Tailstack News started because I was on Notes, and back then Notes was brand new, and all the fiction writers were kind of finding each other. And I was looking at everyone's notes and thinking, like, is anyone gathering this stuff? Like, is anyone, like, over here someone was talking about publishing a book, and over here someone was talking about reaching a certain number of subscribers, and over here someone was starting a serial, and all these things. And I was like, it'd be kind of cool if there was a place where we could find all of these things. So I started Tailstack News, which is a twice monthly newsletter of just, it's a bulletin board. It's a bulletin board of fiction announcements, right? And I'm proud to say that it's still going strong, twice a month. It's ever since 2023 when it started. And even if it's a slow news month, we still do it. I still just have a couple of bullet points of people. But so that, something that I wanted out of that was that, yes, absolutely, writing Tailstack News definitely was a bit of a magnet, a bit of a reader magnet. Because obviously fiction writers would subscribe because they wanted to be able to, I don't require people to subscribe in order to submit something, but at the same time, like, people subscribe because they find it and they go, oh, well, I want to be able to read the news when it comes out, So having that as part of the growth definitely helped. One thing that I did kind of say to myself was I wanted to make sure the balance was still on my fiction, though. because I didn't necessarily want people just to be following me for the news. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who completely ignore my fiction and just are like, I'm just here for Tailstack News. I'm sure that happens. But yeah, for me, the balance was on fiction because I wanted to make a portfolio, but I also wanted to be plugged into the community enough to be able to do this Tailstack News idea. So that's for me where the balance lies between writing fiction and gathering an audience that way, and also writing something that is not strictly fiction but is kind of attached to fiction, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you've had the sense then, by the sounds of things, that people who show up for Tailstack News do then end up finding your fiction. Like, not everyone, obviously, but like that does seem to have turned into a bit of a funnel of sorts.
Yeah, and I do make it. I try to make it clear. It's been a while since I've done this, but I try to make it clear how to unsubscribe because because of sections, you can unsubscribe from certain pieces of someone's newsletter if I do try to make it clear, like, if you don't want my fiction but you just want Tailstack News, there is a way to do that. Like, you can unsubscribe from other things. But yeah, I have found that having some kind of a connection to the community in that way does drive growth in a different way. I'm not going to say in a better way, but in a different way than having just pure fiction. Yeah, I'm not saying it can't be done with just pure fiction. I'm just saying, like, it is different. You get a different audience.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, for my part, it's sort of similar in a way. When I started doing serial fiction 10 years ago, I just did the fiction, that was it. But I was also over on Wattpad, which functions quite differently, in good and bad ways. Like, it was sort of easier to find readers. Like, the stuff I was publishing there had like hundreds of thousands of reads, and it was like really exciting. But I wasn't ever quite sure who they were, and when I went to the next book, they didn't show up. So it was very much Wattpad's algorithm doing the thing. When I moved on to Substack in 2021, I knew I wanted to have a sort of non-fiction side to it, partly because I really enjoy behind the scenes anything, really. Like, behind the scenes of literally anything, and I get quite excited. So whether it's like filmmaking or music or books or computer games, I love learning how things are made. But my general sense is that you don't get very much of that for literature. I'm not sure why. Like, you obviously get interviews with authors and they talk about, the themes of the book, but it doesn't tend to get into the nitty gritty. Like, unless you then like actually go and do a course or something like that, when obviously the whole point is to learn stuff. But you don't get that kind of insider view, which you do get with games and film and music and that kind of thing, where you don't have to be a filmmaker to quite easily encounter like cool behind the scenes documentaries about how a movie was made. And for my previous couple of serials, I had sort of blogged like behind the scenes stuff and like author notes as I'd gone along, but obviously the book was over on Wattpad and the notes were over on my blog, and like no one saw them at all. So I was like, right, well, I'll do a bit of that and combine it. So I'll have new fiction on Friday, non-fiction stuff on Monday. Didn't really know what that actually meant or what it would be, but I'd try and tie it into like the fiction I was writing. So what ended up happening is, like, if that week I'd written an action sequence in a chapter, let's say, I would probably then write something on the Monday about writing action scenes. And so there'd always be that kind of connection between the two, which I think was helpful in that it meant that it wasn't just me like spouting advice without any particular evidence that I knew what I was talking about. Like, people could read the advice, but they could also then go and read the fiction and make up their own mind about whether I was worth listening to or not. And if they decided no, that's completely fine. But it meant there was that connection there, and I was doing that because it was fun. Like, I think that's the really critical thing to get across here. Like, the reason I did that shape of things for the newsletter is because I really enjoy doing it. It turns out that was also a really good way to build the newsletter, because over time, a lot of the articles I did that I put out on Monday about writing turned out to be quite popular, and people like that kind of stuff. And like you were saying, they might come along for that, and then they'll be like, oh, I'll go and have a look at the stories and see what this guy's up to. And then some people would go over and start reading Tales from the Triverse. So yeah, that was kind of my model as well. And I think, generally speaking, if you can combine your fiction with something else that's more answering questions, helping people out, doing a community-based thing like you, it will be easier to grow your newsletter and find readers. But the weird counterintuitive thing is that you probably shouldn't do it if that's the reason you're doing it. Partly because it will probably come across as inauthentic to readers and they'll be like, oh, you're just doing this as a growth strategy. But also because you'll probably end up hating it anyway. Like if you're having to like churn out this extra, like that's when it becomes I published a newsletter a couple of weeks ago complaining about like content, the word content and content creators, because that's when you sort of tip over into slop, I think. So it's very careful. You have to be careful not to accidentally start doing that kind of stuff. And if you just want to write fiction, like you should probably just write fiction, because trying to do anything else is going to make you hate the whole process. But you do have to then accept that finding readers and growing an audience is going to take longer. And regardless of which way you do it, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I think back in the early days of Notes, I used to preach a particular sermon a lot, which was about like, the two ingredients that seemed to me to be the most important for growth on Substack were craft and community, right? I think I'm not saying you have to be, an absolutely incredible writer right out the gate. Like, I think there's absolutely room for people to try stuff, to experiment, to start, just to be a beginner in public. Like, absolutely. That's absolutely what this place is all about. But I think that craft piece, a lot of that is just working on writing as compelling fiction as you can. If your goal is growth, right? Not talking about if someone just wants to use Substack as a journal, that's fine. I'm not talking about that. But if your goal is growth, then writing fiction that has one eye on the audience, that shows that you're attempting to tell stories to people, right? That's the craft piece. It's, you're working on how compelling your writing can be. And then the community, it's engaging, like you said, authentically with the people who are here, your colleagues who are here, the readers who are here. And as much as you can combine those two pieces in whatever way feels the most genuine and consistent and sustainable, like you said, like you don't want to start something that is going to end up being a chore later because you're just doing it because you're trying to be visible. It is more important for you to have sustained organic growth over time than to try and hit on some kind of viral formula that's going to blow up your newsletter. And I mean, that can happen, but it is, I think, having had both types of growth, organic beats viral anytime, because the people who have jumped on the train slowly are the ones who stay because they actually want to be there, So
yeah, and I think that slow organic stuff that tends to come from people recommending you, people reading something and liking it and then forwarding it on to somebody, or just kind of telling people like, oh, I read this thing, it was cool, or check out this writer, they're doing interesting stuff. Whereas the viral stuff, which can do like massive numbers, that tends to be far more algorithmic. So whatever caused that thing to be successful is probably not repeatable for a start. But also the weird combination of like mathematics that resulted in your post like being seen vastly more than any of your other posts. Any subscribers and new readers you get from that, there's a high chance that when you send them like a weird short story a week later, they're going to be like, what the hell is this? And then unsubscribe immediately. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think I've never had more churn than I had when I experienced a viral spike because of something that happened a couple of years ago. And the amount of just every time I sent out a new email, I would lose so many people because they all jumped on for just the reason that I was visible to them. So they thought, oh, okay, fine, follow. And then, when I'm actually trying to show them something, they're like, oh, I don't want that. So yeah, just be aware. I guess the awareness piece of this would just be that if you feel like things are slow, that's a good thing. Like slow does actually mean something. And the people who choose to join you in a slow growth tend to be the ones who will be with you for longer because they are considered in the way that
Yeah.
they're jumping on the train.
Yes, exactly. And I think, 15 years of social media have sort of given us bad habits and trained us to think in certain ways that don't actually make sense when if you're publishing via a newsletter, whether it's Substack or somewhere else, like actually, yeah, slower but more meaningful people is what you want. Because at the timescales we're talking about here, we're talking years, basically. Like when you say, slow growth, those people will be around for a while. Like they will still be reading you 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now. You might have changed newsletter platform and the internet's shifted and done all sorts of crazy things, but those people will follow you around. And that's not the case with like a sudden spike of virality or what have you. And in terms of, to put a bit more concrete time on this thing, in terms of growth, we've said, it's slow and you've got to be patient. But what that means is like, we're not talking days or weeks. We are talking months at the very least, probably years. I sometimes see like people on Substack Notes, for example, will be like, I've been sending out newsletters on Substack for a month and I've got no growth at all. It's rubbish. I'm going to go somewhere else. And it's like, it's not really how it works.
No.
um,
And I have empathy for those people because I do think that a lot of them are trying strategies that would work on other platforms. And so they're like, why is this not working here? And, if someone were to ask me, how long should it take me to grow on Substack? Or like, my question back to them would be, how long does it take you to build trust? Like, you can't put a number on that. Like the point is people will, especially in a newsletter setting, when they're giving you their email address, it's very different than hitting the follow button on Instagram and just being like, okay, I'm happy to see this person in my feed more often. When they're giving you their email address, what they're saying is, I like your work enough that I want to see more of it. And I literally want it in my inbox. And I think we have to remember that when we're worried about growth or engagement or any of those things, is that what you're trying to do is build a certain sense of trust around, this is me, this is the kind of stuff I'm doing, this is the kind of stuff you can expect. If you give me your email address, my promise back to you is I'm not going to waste your time, right? And of course, then it's up to that audience member to decide if what they're getting works for them or not, you know? And I don't know if we're jumping ahead to say this, but that's why unsubscribes should never be seen as some kind of dark mark or some kind of like, oh, what have I done wrong? It's like, you haven't done anything wrong. It's very likely that what's happened is people have just decided that there are other things that they need to prioritize or whatever. And it's good, actually. It's good for people to unsubscribe because that actually helps you because you don't have someone just hanging on who isn't interested in what you're giving.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, over time, you're like the cool thing about doing a newsletter is that over time, your audience becomes more and more precisely the audience that you need to have. Like if you consistently keep going, like you'll have a trickle of people coming in. You will have some people leaving, but it's okay because they were not that into it. Maybe it took them a little while to realize it. But at the end of that process, you've got a better list, and that churn continues to optimize your subscriber lists over time in really useful ways. I think so. Again, to get into how long this stuff takes, like I think the first year on Substack when I started doing the newsletter, like hardly anybody was reading or subscribing, and it was very slow. But I was putting out new chapters. Second year, it started to creep up a little bit, and that's when Substack also started experimenting with things like recommendations. I think notes came in towards the end of that, and like those things all help. They're like levers that can accelerate growth a little bit. But for me, the thing was just putting out content. I use the word content. I shouldn't have. Putting out quality material
Right.
on a regular basis, consistently. And like you were saying, I think that builds trust. So you will get some people who maybe fly by and read one article or read a chapter and are kind of like, yeah, it's all right. And then someone will share another chapter or something like a month later, and they'll be like, oh, it's that writer again. And then they'll have another look, and they'll be like, actually, yeah, no, this is good, and I'll subscribe. So it is a long game. It's not like an instant, immediate subscribe always. Sometimes there's a sort of slow process of trying to convince people, and making it as easy as possible for people to come back and figure out what's going on. I think we talked about this last time, so that, if you're doing a long fiction project, or if someone just randomly arrives at like chapter 16, make sure there are ways for them to figure out what it is, what's going on, how to get started, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all takes ages is the point. So you have to be prepared for that from the start. If you want like super fast growth and to be making loads of money straight away, then I think fiction is not the thing to do it with. Probably never has been in like any way of publishing fiction. Like it's you hear about the crazy one-off success stories, but generally fiction is not a fast way to make cash and get famous. And there's other ways you can do that, including with newsletters. Like go and write about culture or politics or something, and you'll do great. If you want to do fiction, then yeah, you just got to be nice and slow, enjoy writing it, and yeah, as long as you enjoy the writing, you'll be fine. And over time, it will tick up. And I think what's interesting, and we'll get to community, that there's more and more people doing this. And in my experience, rather than that being competition, actually the more fiction writers who are kind of poking at this thing and trying to figure out how to do fiction on our own terms and send it out via email and newsletters and Substack or Ghost or what have you, like the more people doing it, the more readers come along and give it a try as well. And I'm all kind of figuring out how all these like weird pieces slot together.
Yeah, I think some people forget that, because I think I've said this in other parts of this series, that it's hard for me to imagine joining the platform now, with notes already intact and what the infrastructure looks like now. Because having watched all these things happen gradually, it's easier to comprehend that Substack is a platform, and there's notes and there's communities on notes and there's all of us talking and all these things happening. But there's also just a whole lot of readers who don't even care about Substack. They're just here because they have given the email address to a writer. And so they're reading in their email and they're not thinking about Substack as a platform. So
they don't even know that we're using Substack.
No. So what the good part about that is that means that when you are engaging with the platform here and engaging with other writers, I know there's a lot of kind of worry that we're all just like sharing the same pool of attention because like we're all just writers reading other writers. And it's like, well, first of all, that's fine because writers are also readers. But also second, every writer that you encounter has an audience that might now encounter you. And a lot of it is a hidden audience that you don't know about. So that's why it's so important to engage authentically and to have these conversations. Because everyone is constantly pulling readers from their own whatever they're doing. There's all these little silos and people are constantly pulling readers from all these different directions. And so I think it's important to remember that there's a whole lot of invisible attention out there that you don't have to worry. I like to say that we're not all sharing pieces of a pie. We're constantly making more pie. Like everyone is making pie. And that's great because it means that there's no scarcity. Like the more people who join is the more expansion. That means that there's more readers to go around constantly. So you don't have to worry that, you're going to get shafted, that like you're not going to get enough readers because everyone else has too many or something.
Yeah. It's also why I don't worry that much when Substack are doing things like adding video features and live streaming and podcasting and bits and pieces like that. Because like people who like to watch videos also, like quite a lot of them like to read as well. So ultimately it's more potential people, and the people that aren't interested in reading well, that they never were, so it doesn't change anything. Doesn't really matter. So yeah, it all helps. So in terms of like with newsletters where you do encounter algorithms, so I think like we're both on Substack, and I think the people watching this, most of them are probably also using Substack. If you're not, and you're using something like Ghost or Beehive, or even if you're not even doing the newsletter route and you're going out through Wattpad or Real Road or something, that's a harder thing to give advice on, I think, because you're in wholly algorithmic land. Like you're going to have to go out to Facebook and Blue Sky and the likes to try and get the word out. I think Substack is interesting at the moment because it does have this algorithmic component, which is notes, but it seems as of, where are we, June 2026, like it seems tuned in a way that can work quite nicely for fiction writers and writers generally, without you having to like contort yourself into weird shapes. And in terms of like how to make use of that as a way to find readers, like I think my main tip is just to take part in other people's conversations, and not in a weird way. Like, don't be that weird person at a party who comes up and just immediately starts telling you about their stuff, or like just hands over a business card or something. Like, listen to what other people are chatting about, and if you've got something interesting to say, contribute that. And the way Substack is built, it's really easy that if you see a comment from someone on Notes and they've said something really interesting, you can, like, in 2 clicks, go and check them out and subscribe, basically. So that's a really effective way I've found to find new readers, but also to meet other writers and to meet interesting people and just have cool conversations. And it doesn't feel like you're trying to game the system or doing some kind of like weird growth hack tactic, which is like what it always feels like when I'm trying to do anything on any other social media platform. You can just show up and take part in conversations that you would want to anyway. Scoot says basically be nosy and like take part. But that's the thing. I think it's when you see new people who show up on Notes, they don't always necessarily sort of get that. Like, there's not some big secret. It's literally look out for things that interest you, and then try and be interesting as well, and contribute some stuff.
Yeah, I think it might have been you actually in the early days of Notes talking about how Notes feels like the teacher's lounge. It's the place where we all go to have our conversations before we go back to our own little classrooms or whatever it is that we're doing, right? And I like to think of Notes is like a pub, right? Like, and I mean a pub more in like the traditional sense of the word, not here in America where it really isn't the same thing as much, but where it's where people gather. And if you're gathering in a place, it's weird if you walk up to a cluster of people and say, I'd like you to read this, just like hand them something. It's kind of like, okay,
here's my book.
Yeah, I don't know who you are. And so like, that's why I think I can see how Substack and Notes can feel overwhelming to people. As an introvert myself, I understand how it can feel overwhelming to feel like you have to interact with people in order to get them to interact with you, right? But unfortunately and fortunately, that is how it works. It is the kind of place where if you engage with authenticity with other people over time, then you're going to start finding your people, right? And it might not be the initial group that you start introducing yourself to. It's more, it's very similar to just normal life in that way. The more that you engage without this kind of underlying mercenary idea that it's like, I'm engaging so that people will buy my book or will subscribe to me or whatever. It's like, or just enjoy the fact that there's so many different people here discussing so many different things, and it can be fun to just joke around. It can be fun to engage with some really interesting ideas. That is how you start to find people. And I think it's really important to remember that like, that is how Notes is at its most powerful. I know how frustrating it can be to see the people who show up and say, I'd like to meet more fiction writers. And they have like 500 likes on their note. And you're like, how? And it's like, well, it's because people understand that there's a desperation, right? Be wary of anyone who plays on your desperation for connection. That's a warning I will give, because I think you and I have both seen a lot of that on Substack. There are people who will use that emotional capital as leverage to get more attention. But if it makes you feel any better, that capital or that attention that they're getting is not going to last. It's just for that moment where people are like, I'm a fiction writer, talk to me. It's like you're going to have a much better time if you actually talk to people, if you engage with what they're talking about, and you start seeing the same names around the neighborhood. That is really where the magic is, because then those people are more likely to interact with you and then to maybe recommend you. And that, like you said, recommendations are such a crazy engine for growth that I think it's really important to to build those friendships as, again, organically as you possibly can, because that is where a lot of the magic is. So.
Yeah. I think you use the word authenticity there, which is the correct word, but it's also a word that has been horribly corrupted by every CEO that exists on the planet, right? But it does apply in this case. And I think maybe another way of saying it is just be normal.
Yeah.
just because, and the reason for that is not just because it sort of works, but also it comes back to our earlier point, which is that you want to be growing your newsletter subscriber base in just a slow, organic, normal way, because if you're doing it any other way, it's not really going to work. It will work very briefly, and then they'll all unsubscribe as soon as you send them what you actually write. So if you just be kind of normal, engage in conversations you're genuinely interested in, maybe keep it sort of on topic to whatever your newsletter is, but then that means that whatever conversation you're taking part in there, if someone follows you down that rabbit hole to your newsletter, they'll then see all your posts and be like, oh yeah, this is cool. This is what I'm interested in. And they'll subscribe, and then you'll send them a newsletter and they'll read it and be like, yes. And then that's all good. If you try and do authenticity in a tech bro authenticity kind of way, it might work very fleetingly, but then as soon as you send someone a newsletter, they're going to be like, oh, what's this? And then unsubscribe. So it doesn't work.
Yeah, I like what Kel just said. Be your normal, because wearing a mask is exhausting. That, yes, I like that framing, because yes, I think to find your people, you should be you, right? And I also think that you should be prepared for what that means, because that means you're not going to be for everyone, And speaking as someone who has exhausted myself many a time, trying to be as palatable as possible to as many people as possible. I'm a recovering people pleaser. It's just what we do. But I just, be aware that you're not going to be everyone's favorite flavor, And so I think, but know that going in, so that you're not disappointed if it doesn't feel like everyone enjoys everything that you're doing, I think another thing I will say too is a connection with that is just be prepared that your notes presence is different than Twitter in a lot of ways. One of the main ways it's different is that your notes presence is a direct echo of your newsletter, right? Meaning, if you're engaging in a lot of really contentious conversations on notes, if you're engaging in a lot of political talk on notes, I'm not telling you not to, I'm just saying recognize that will have ramifications for how many people are going to be willing to read what you're writing. And especially if you're a fiction writer and it has nothing to do with what you're talking about on notes, Be aware there's a lot of people who might just write you off because they've seen, or there are some people who seem to enjoy being a jerk on notes. If that's your vibe, people are not going to read your fiction. So
No.
I think it's important to remember that on something like Twitter, you can just fire off a take and people will dislike you, but they won't care necessarily. But on Substack, your notes presence is a pretty direct line to what you're writing. It's like somebody standing outside their flea market stall shouting expletives at people and then being like, I wonder why no one's coming in to look at my wares. It's like, of course they're not. Nobody wants that, So just be be ready for the audience that you are attracting, I guess would be my note there.
Yeah, like don't be a dick unless your newsletter is about being a dick.
Exactly.
Basically,
yeah.
But yeah, like, you know, I have a lot of political opinions, but I don't go on Notes to talk about them. I will put a lot of my politics into my fiction in hopefully a sort of elegant, thought-provoking way or whatever. But that's the way I do it. Like the stuff I post on Notes, 90% is going to be about writing in some way. I mean, I go all sorts of tangents around that, but I'm not going to suddenly start gibbering about like something that is not in any way related to the newsletter, because that's not kind of how it works. I think for writers, like you have to have a slightly professional mindset to it, which doesn't mean turning into like LinkedIn, because that's terrible in completely the other way. But you know, it's like if you were doing an author event or if you were on a panel at a book festival, you know, think about that a little bit, which maybe sounds a bit grandiose, but like, how would you want to present yourself to that audience? And then, you know, have a little bit of that in the way that you use stuff like Substack Notes, because I think it then it connects it all up a little bit. Obviously, if you write about politics, if you write a political newsletter, get into it as much as you want. That's completely fine. In fact, it would be weird not to. But
yeah, I think I'm a big believer in taking the posture of the thing that you want to be, even if you aren't that yet. And so if your goal is to be a respected writer, stand in the posture of being that first, right? Like this is the time to practice, you know? And so I think, like you said, you know, using that idea of being at a book signing or being in a panel or something, even if that seems like a faraway goal, first of all, it might not be. But second of all, yeah, like I think it's important to Peter just said, it sounds like dress for the job. Yeah, like dress for the job you want. And that's exactly. And I think I'm a huge believer in that. I think it was a big mindset shift for me well before Substack, when someone recommended calling myself a writer when I was introducing myself to people. Because at the time I was working in preschool. I did not want to be a preschool teacher. I enjoyed my job, but I didn't want to do that forever. And so someone was like, why don't you introduce yourself as, I'm a writer, but I'm currently working in education. And I was like, oh, that's great. So I started doing that. And it's funny how, you know, it wasn't a lie. I was writing, just no one was reading it at that time. But how much that rewired my brain for what I wanted out of everything. So by the time Substack came along, it was a lot easier to be like, yes, I'm a writer. I've been saying that for a couple of years now, and it's true. So yeah, I think it's important to have that mindset.
Yeah, definitely. No, I had a very similar thing where I shifted. And you know, when you meet someone new and they're like, oh, what do you do? And like being able to go, oh, I'm a writer. I also do this day job thing. And, you know, it's not about necessarily putting the day job down, because like you say, it might be a cool job. But if you put writer first, if that's who you want to actually be, it doesn't matter like which one of those things is giving you the most money or which one of them you're putting the most time into. It's kind of more about a statement of intent, isn't it? Yeah, I like that a lot. In terms of other bits that you can do to find readers, so, you know, there is all the other social media stuff. If you want to get into that, cool. I'm not going to have any good advice for that because I stopped using pretty much all other social media years ago. And I mean, the only thing I say there, I suppose, is that despite not using other social media platforms, my newsletter's done all right. So it is possible to not bother with that. The only thing I think with all that kind of thing, it's worth tracking your time a little bit, like how much time you're putting into each of these things, and picking your platform quite carefully for your audience. And if you're okay with the amount of time you're putting into it, then that's all cool. If you look at it and you're like, oh, hang on a minute, I spent 3 times more going to Facebook and then Instagram and then Twitter and then Blue Sky and then finding Reddit forum, and you know, if you spend more time doing that than doing the actual writing, then that's maybe an issue to sort out. And in terms of what to do if you're not doing that, because like I think we've all been so hardwired that you have to be on every social platform, and 10 years ago that's what we were all doing. Like I would say, look at things like BookFunnel, which is a lot more expensive now than it used to be, which is annoying, but it enables you to do kind of group promotions with other newsletter writers and get in front of readers. It's more like direct advertising, but it's, in my experience, it's a lot more successful than actually running ads. But also like collaborate with other writers. This is why it's worth getting into the community, because I mean, like me and Sally right now, we're doing an interesting, cool thing. And it's fun and we're hopefully being helpful. But at the same time, all of my readers are now aware of Sally's stuff and might go and check it out. And all of Sally's readers are now aware of my stuff and might go and check it out. So it's, that's a really nice, organic, natural way of just sort of introducing readers to each other and going, have a look if you want or not. And yeah, I mean, maybe, seek out podcasts if there's kind of indie podcasts that talk about your genre or indie fiction in general or something like that. Like, just drop them an email and be like, I'm doing this thing. Would that be interesting? And you go on as a guest. Yeah. Sometimes it's surprising when you ask people and say, hey, I'm over here doing this thing. It's surprising how many people are actually interested and up for having that conversation. So yeah, I think doing all of those things I would suggest doing more of that, put the time into that rather than going on to like Zuckerberg's latest folly.
Yeah, I think people get, understandably, people get wiggly about self-promo. And I hear a lot of people, especially in the self-publishing, talk about how much they hate marketing themselves and all this stuff. And I understand. I will say, like, I think people overthink it. Now, take it from me as someone who, it's not like I'm making thousands of dollars on my self-published work. I'm not. But I will say that I think people overthink self-promo because they think they really have to sell someone on their work. And so that's why you see a lot of people putting a lot of effort into certain things that don't have as good of a return, maybe. I would say that what's helped me in self-promo is just thinking, I have a thing that I think some people might like. So I am going to offer that thing to the people who might like it. That's all self-promo has to be. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And so if you are cold calling, cold DMing, whatever, it's okay to just be as short, sweet, succinct as possible and just say, I write this. I think you might be interested. Can we talk more about that? Done. Doesn't that have to be this like massive thing where you have to, convince them of anything? If they are interested, they will tell you and they will pick up the baton and, hopefully do a podcast or do a collaboration or whatever it happens to be. I say the same thing. I know we're not really talking right now about like our published books or anything like that, but like same idea with walking into a bookstore and offering your books to a local bookstore. I have had great luck with that simply by being just as simple as possible with it and not making it a big deal, just saying like, I have books. Would you like these books? And they either say yes or no. And that's okay. If they say no, it's like, okay, that's fine. On to the next, and I think people need to think that way about self-promo and about doing some of these reach out opportunities. I know how hard it can be to have the confidence to think that you deserve to be able to do that. I know that's like a huge mental block for some people, that they're like, well, I'm not really a writer, or I'm not really an author, or I don't have this finished. It's like, that's okay. Take what you already have and offer it to people. That's all you have to do. Does not have to be any more complicated than that. So.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't always have to be the hard sell. And I think the long-term nature of newsletters is what's nice, because it actually doesn't need to be the hard sell. If you're doing a book launch and it's like a print book that's coming out, it sort of does have to be the hard sell, because at the launch point you want it to do well. With a newsletter, you can sort of relax a little bit. I mean, it's a bit like this series we're doing where we're talking about serial fiction, and obviously we have mentioned our own work occasionally as examples of what we're on about, and to demonstrate that we're not just making everything up. It's not like we take 10 minutes at the start to like give people a sales pitch on why they should go and read our stuff. Like, the idea is that hopefully we will say some interesting things and maybe provide some useful advice or just have a nice chat or whatever. And then that will convince some people to go and check it out, and that's cool. And again, the people who become interested through that route, like they're the kind of readers that, if they then like it, obviously, they're going to still be there 5 years later reading your stuff because they encountered it in this pleasant, organic manner. It's just going to take ages. that's the main thing. Yeah. So we should probably fast forward a little bit. So let's assume people have some readers. They have people showing up and reading the fiction, reading the stuff. So what happens then? Because obviously you've got your subscriber numbers and you can see posts are being viewed or what have you. But maybe nobody's commenting. Like it's just a weird silence. Like it's going out to these people. Where are they? What's going on? And I think that it's really important, particularly with fiction, that like lots of fiction readers don't comment. Like how many times if you think about just reading a novel, like normally we read a novel and that's it. I mean, we might go and talk to family or friends about it, but it's not a normal thing to go up to the author and be like, oh, by the way, I just read a chapter of your book and I have to now tell you about it. Like that's actually quite weird. So yeah, I think not every chapter of a fiction serial is going to turn into like loads of engagement in the sort of traditional way. That's been my experience anyway. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. First of all, I have interacted with quite a few people who have said to me that they never comment because they just genuinely don't know what they could say or add. Like they just don't have anything to say other than I liked that. So they don't say anything. Lack of engagement genuinely doesn't mean anything. And I mean, even open rates can be a little bit tricky because these days a lot of email providers don't allow Substack to track open rates, which is why I always tell people do not clean up your email list based on the star rating of what's on your stats. It's not real. Don't do that because you might cut some people who have been loving your work. They just have an email address that doesn't allow that tracking. And so that can be a big blow to their trust if suddenly they've been kicked off the list. So yeah, I would just say engagement is not an indicator of value. It's great and it feels good and it's nice to have. And of course it's good to engage with the engagement. It's good to respond to comments if you can. I struggled with that early on in my fiction. I'll be honest. I didn't really know what to say back. And I also kind of worried that I didn't want to build the precedent of responding to every comment because I was worried about like, what if I get negative comments and then I feel like I have to respond to that. And I don't want to get into that habit because I don't think that's a good habit to be in. Lately I've been trying more to kind of engage with the engagement as much as I can because I just think it's, people like to know that you're actually paying attention to what they're saying when they comment on your fiction. But don't put too much emotional stock in the idea that you need to have likes and comments in order to know that you're on the right track. I think it's important to put out the work that you want to put out. And yeah, I mean, unless you're getting a bunch of negative comments of people saying, this is horrible, which is not great. That's not really a good, again, that's also not a great indicator of quality because some people are always going to have opinions about what you put out. That's just the fact of the internet. So
yes, exactly. So yeah, I mean, maybe we should get into that a little bit. So like what to do based on types of comment. So like we've said, there's a good chance you won't get many comments, certainly at first. Like the ratio of number of readers to number of comments is like ridiculously skewed. So if you've got 100 readers, like one of them is going to comment sometimes, perhaps, and that's just how it goes. But let's say you got to a point where you are getting some comments through, and you'll probably find that there are regular commenters, because if someone is the type of person who likes to comment on chapters, they will probably comment more than once, which is really cool. But they'll keep coming back. But then uh, if you have positive comments, so you've got people saying nice things, like what's the tips for that? And I think it's something you were saying about, do you reply to everything? Do you not reply? That I think there's sometimes a risk that if the author wades in too frequently or too early, you can kind of neuter the conversation a bit. So, if there is any potential for readers to be chatting about stuff amongst themselves, if the writer just shows up suddenly and says the definitive statement, then there's nothing left to discuss here. So it's a tricky balance, but I generally try to acknowledge comments, but quite often it'll just be like a thanks, and that's it, unless they've raised a particular topic or something. But yeah, it's a tricky balance knowing what to do, and also how much time to put in, because it doesn't necessarily scale. And it's not a problem you have at the start when you've got like a couple of comments coming in, but if you ever get to a point where you're getting lots and lots and lots of comments, then if you've established that you reply to every single one, and then you get to a point 5 years from now and you're getting 100 comments on every chapter, like, then what do you do then? That's a tricky thing. But yeah, I don't know if you've got any further thoughts on positive comments and what to do there.
Yeah, I think I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. When it comes to theorizing, especially if you're serializing, because obviously we're talking about serials as much as possible here, you'll get some, if things are going well, you might get some theorizing. People might make some guesses about what's going to come next. People, and yeah, I think those are the kinds of comments that you have to tread lightly about engaging with, because you don't necessarily, I know how fun it can be to feel like, oh, people are reading, so I kind of want to like wink and nudge that like, you'll have to wait and see kind of stuff. And it's like, that can be fun, but also it's okay to let those things ride and let people make the wrong guesses. That's actually really fun. I think it's actually really fun when you start seeing people theorizing and they're kind of going off into the weeds somewhere. And it's like, it's also good data for you to know. They're like, okay, well, clearly I've indicated something about that. So maybe I should make it a little bit more clear about which direction I'm going, not to change things up too much, but just to be able to kind of say like, okay, clearly this was what was being read into, and now I kind of want to take it this way.
And it's useful to know, isn't it, whether have I deliberately like laid some red herrings or misled people, or have I actually just confused people by accident because I didn't do something very well? As you say, it's a really useful data point.
Yeah. I think I am very staunch on the idea that the feedback that you get in a public forum like Substack is not to be taken as like, these are not editors, right? These are not, this is not a developmental editor. This is not someone who is giving you notes on how to change what you're doing. So be careful about taking the feedback you're getting from readers and making it part of your writing, because if you have a plan already, like we've talked about in previous series, parts of this series, stick to the plan and don't veer off of it just because somebody made a guess that you're like, oh, that would actually be better, and maybe it would be better, or like, oh, someone guessed my twist, oh no, kind of thing. It's like, it's all right, just let it ride, let it continue on. Don't take, and I'm sure we'll get to this with the idea of negative feedback as well, but like, don't take feedback as an automatic note that you need to change something. It might just be data for you to log away in your mind for later, So, yeah.
Yeah, because most readers will be reading your fiction because they want your fiction specifically. If they want a story to just wrap around their every whim, they'll just go and use ChatGPT or something. So you have to keep on target to what you had in mind. Negative comments then. And I think I'm going to sort of separate constructive criticism. We'll get to that in a second, but like just negative comments. So I think there's maybe two types of negative comment. One is where it's negative, but it's polite. So it could just be someone, you put a short story up and someone goes, I didn't really like this, but that's it. Or they go like, sorry, wasn't my thing. That kind of thing. I think in that case, I would either like ignore it and just let it be, or am I to acknowledge it, kind of like, well, thanks for reading, leave it at that. Main thing is to not try and like convince them otherwise or something, which, you see some big name authors getting into that kind of thing in like Amazon reviews and what have you, and it's never a good idea. And then there's negative comments that are not polite, that are rude or abusive or what have you. And my main thing would be to just block them and move along.
Yeah.
I don't think it's worth spending any more time on that, really.
Yeah. No, I think, negative comments, the polite negative comments can be tricky, but I always try to remember, think about the mentality of a person who is leaving a comment like that. Clearly, they are thinking they are being helpful, right? And so it's always good, I think, to remember that and say, is this as helpful as they think it is right now? The answer is probably not. Because I think in a public space like Substack, and also I will say too, I think we as authors have to be kind of careful because we tend to parrot the statement like, I'm looking for feedback. And it's like, don't say that unless you actually mean that. Because I think there are a lot of people who say they're looking for feedback. Well, what they're saying is, what they actually mean is, I want people to read it. And I get that. You want connection. You want people to read your work. If you're looking for feedback, be really careful about saying that because there are some people who will take you up on that and they will give you feedback. And preparing to receive feedback is challenging, and also getting feedback from particularly useful sources is also difficult. And I'm speaking as an editor right now as I'm saying that. I don't think that a public platform is the best place to get feedback on how to change your work, only because you're going to get a million different opinions and you don't know where they're coming from. They're just coming from people in a community who are reading your work, right? And that is data. It's not feedback. That is something that's important for you to know, maybe, and something that's important for you to filter through your own writing process. Because it could be someone who's just reading your work and they don't like your style. They don't like the way that you write. They don't like the genre that you're writing in. And for some reason, they feel the need to say something. And so you shouldn't take that as gospel and say, oh, well, this person didn't like that I do this, so therefore I shouldn't do that. It's like, well, no, maybe it's just not for them,
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say when it comes to the feedback that's not polite, there is absolutely zero reason to engage with that. Just let it go. Block it, mute it, move on. It's not worth your time because those are the kinds of people who they're not interested in helping, even helping in an unhelpful way. They're just being mean.
Yeah.
You don't need that in your life.
No, exactly. I'd say the other thing I say about that is that in 10 years of writing serial fiction in various places online, like I can count those kind of comments on like less than 10 fingers. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's very rare. Like I think when it comes to writing, that people who are bothering to read fiction in the first place, like there's a certain barrier to entry there that kind of cuts out some of the worst of online trolls, I'd say. But then in terms of constructive criticism and more kind of useful negative comments, like some of it might actually be really useful, but also like you're saying, it's interesting, but you shouldn't necessarily start like changing your plan just because of it, because ultimately, like, negative comments always lodge in our brains more than positive comments. Like, you can have 10 people say nice things and one person say something negative, and you'll zero in on that for whatever reason that humans do that. And I think it's quite useful to remember that the most popular and also the most critically acclaimed books of all time, or music, film, whatever, loads of people hate them. Like, as long as you remember that and keep that framing context or whatever, then it makes it easier to deal with any negative stuff that comes in, I think.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be a reason to scare you off of sharing your work publicly. I will say too that Substack just in general has been overwhelmingly positive. I think what you're more likely to encounter is silence rather than negativity. And I'm not sure which is worse. Like silence definitely can feel really hurtful when it just feels like you've got nothing coming in. And that is where I will say, like, first of all, if you do have readers and they're not engaging, that might just be a sign that you've got a lot of lurkers, and there is nothing wrong. I love my lurkers. I love them dearly, and I appreciate every single one of them. And I think that's, it can be so hard to write to silence. I know I can see William in chat is talking about that. Yeah. Like it can be really hard to write to silence and to feel like you're just not getting any engagement at all. But that is where if you're getting opens, like if people are opening it, then it might just have to come down to saying, like, I'm going to continue to write for these people who I don't know. For that reader out there who looks forward to my stuff and never says anything. And I'm glad that I've been at this for a while, because I've now had a couple of times where people have reached out to me via email to say,
Yeah.
I read every single thing you write. I just have never said anything because I just don't, I don't know what to say, but I just wanted to thank you. And like, I am not saying that to brag, but as much to maybe pass that along to anyone watching who maybe hasn't had that experience, to say, just because people aren't engaging does not mean they're not reading, and does not mean they're not looking forward to what you're writing. And so there has to be a bit of your intrinsic motivation to continue, but also knowing that there just might be some silent enjoyers of what you've got going on that just don't know how to say it. I mean, I can tell you, I'm a YouTube lover. I watch a lot of YouTube. I hardly ever comment. I hardly ever say anything to some of the YouTubers that I enjoy more than anything in the world. They're comfort watches for me, right? But I've never told them that. So I think, just remember all the times that you've engaged with art and haven't said anything. And remember that when you're writing and you're not getting engagement, it doesn't necessarily mean that nobody's there. So.
Yeah, definitely. A couple of bits in the chat that I thought were worth pointing out. Ben mentioned that, because people are asking, if open rates are unreliable, if you're not getting any comments, then how do you know what's going on at all? And Ben said that if your subscriber list doesn't drop more than it grows, that's a good indication. Because, we were saying, like, unsubscribe's not a problem because those people were not the right people to be reading your stuff anyway, but you do want to be getting more people than you're losing, ideally. But also with that, don't look at it on a day-to-day or weekly basis. Like, it should be like a 3-month, 6-month period. Like, have a look at the average over that time, and just hopefully going in the right kind of direction. And let me just find the comment. Victor, here we go. Victor said he's trying to figure out if Substack is something that can be built, or if it's a slot machine and you only get anywhere if the algorithm gods deem you worthy for a day, which I think is a good question. I'm not sure anyone fully knows the answers to that, because we all only have our own experience to draw upon. And I think before we started the live chat, Sally, we were both saying that a lot of our newsletters' success, there's a significant component of luck in there, which is really hard to provide useful advice on. So, I did some videos that turned out to be successful on Google, so that when people typed in "what is Substack," my video popped up, and then a lot of people found the newsletter that way. That wasn't the plan. It just is a thing that happened. And if I hadn't done that, then my current subscriber count would probably be a lot lower than it is. So there's weird things like that you can't really account for. But I think, as that saying, that luck is preparation combined with opportunity. So I think there are things you can do to try and make the most of what you have and pull as many levers as you can. And Substack, I think, is the one place that I'm aware of that is not completely dependent on the algorithm. So if, when I used to post my serial fiction on Wattpad, that was 100% algorithm. I had no control over whether a book was successful or not. Like, if a book is good, that helps, because then people will keep reading it. But other than that, no idea what was going on there. With Substack, it does feel that the type of stuff that I write and the way I combined it does seem to have resulted in things that people like to read in some manner or another. But there's also an element of algorithmic luck that is really hard to account for and could change at any moment. Which is why we're sort of I've had 5 years of it working quite well, but I'm constantly on edge waiting for something to change and it all to completely fall apart. So
Yeah. We've wandered into one of my bugbears, so I'll try to keep it short. But I will say, I think people get a little bit hung up on some of the terms that have come out of social media. Algorithm has become a bit of a dirty word, and I understand why, but I also want to be very clear that an algorithm behaves differently depending on what platform it's being used on, right? So when people talk about the algorithm, a lot of people talk about like Instagram and TikTok. And remember that those platforms are driven by marketing and direct sales because that's how they make their money is through ads, right? So Instagram shows you ads, TikTok shows you ads plus sellers, people who actually sell on the platform. So that is why the algorithm is going to be tuned to keeping you on the platform for the longest possible time so they can sell you more stuff, right? That's why people hear algorithm and they go, "Ooh, algorithm bad." And it's like, on Substack, the algorithm doesn't behave that way because that's not how Substack works. Substack makes money when people pay for subscriptions. At the moment, we don't have ads. I'm hoping that stays that way. We don't have, sponsorships in the traditional sense. We don't have some of that stuff. So I think when you're thinking about the algorithm, don't think of it as this enemy that you need to convince to show you to more people. All you really have to do is just be very clear in your intent, especially on notes, about what it is that you're talking about when you use words like fiction, words, that are like related to storytelling and all that kinds of stuff, and talking about your books and things like that. The algorithm is smart enough to pick up on also the people that you engage with. So when you're engaging with other fiction writers, it will see you and say, oh, they want to be in the fiction bucket. Now, it will continue to be a bit of a crapshoot where it will still show you a few things that are outside of what you care about, and you do have to maybe be a little bit more clear. You have to kind of train it, how to train your algorithm. You have to kind of mute, block, tell it, like, I don't want to see that. Please don't show me that anymore. And it will start to show you and put you in front of these people that are like-minded in interest and like-minded in focus. And that's not something to be suspicious about at the moment, because again, that's just not how Substack is built. It is a good thing. We like the algorithm when it's working properly. Okay. So
yeah,
I think that's what I would say is, instead of being freaked out about the idea of an algorithm and thinking that it needs to decide, like, the reason why things go viral is because they're as palatable as possible. And so the algorithm goes, oh, well, that's something that the most possible people will want to see. So I will show it to the most possible people because it's very universal, right? Whereas fiction is like, it's niche. It's something that only certain people are talking about on Substack. So if you're not going to necessarily be shown to you're not going to necessarily be shown to all the political people or all the tech writers or all the cooking writers. Like, you're not going to be shown to those people. And so it might not be viral in that way, because you're not just like making a very, no offense to the people who've done this, but like a very vanilla statement that goes mega massive viral because everyone can agree with it, So I think leveraging the algorithm really just boils down to being as specific as possible with your own intent for the kinds of people that you want to see you. And I think that's a good thing. I think that that's a positive thing. Again, with the way Substack is now, hopefully things don't change in ways that will make us worried about it in the next few years. But for now, that's the way it works. And yeah, I think that's where some of the luck can come from, is just people just happening to see you because a certain number of people saw you on Notes and boosted you. But like William just said, there is luck outside the algorithm. There's ways people can find you. Again, recommendations are a huge engine for this. if you get recommended by certain people, it's just going to boost you, and you're just going to have this like running number of people who are who are finding you outside of that. Yeah, as much as possible, I'm trying to disenchant people of the idea that algorithms are this like dark force that are trying to ruin our day. It depends on the platform you're on and who's making money from that platform. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, absolutely. Like, algorithms are needed in some way when there's that amount of stuff, basically, because a chronological feed is not going to work in that context. So yeah, it comes down to the motivation. But the other thing to remember is that with the newsletter, like at its core, you do have a way of reaching your readers that is completely non-algorithmic, which is that you just send them an email. Obviously, there's some complicating factors in that some clients like Gmail then apply a load of algorithmic guff on top to like put emails into different buckets and what have you. But if you just want to do a newsletter and send it out to people who are subscribed to the newsletter, you can ignore all of the Substack algorithmic bits and bobs, for sure. And the other thing I'd say is, like, anyone who's fairly new to Substack, there's a few people in the chat who I think are newish. Substack is also unusual in that a lot of the designers and developers of the platform, people who work at Substack, write about what they're doing and their design decisions like a lot. So definitely seek out people like Mills Baker, Ben Cohen, Zach at Substack. Don't actually know what his surname is. There's a few other people who I don't remember off the top of my head. But anytime you're wondering why the hell they've just done some new weird thing, or you're like, what is this algorithm even meant to be doing? Like, they do write about it and they talk about it quite openly. How long they'll do that for, I don't know. Like, I'm very pro Substack at the moment because it's been really good and it's I think they've made lots of good decisions. They've also put their foot in it a million times in terms of public relations and dealing with some thornier issues. So they're very, very far from perfect. But I think their motivations generally are pretty good. The main thing is that they write about them. So you can read their motivations in detail rather than it just sort of happening at you. Whereas I think when, if Instagram changes its algorithm, like, you don't really know why or when or how it happened, it's just completely ruined your entire day, and your business is now gone down the tubes. So they don't do it like that. Right, we're running a little bit long here, so let's just wrap up. In that, you're building an audience. Hopefully, you're getting some feedback, whether it's comments or some likes, or you just get the feeling people are out there. Over time, that sort of snowballs into what could be a community, I think. So it goes from individual readers to the sense that there's something a bit more there. I think maybe it could be that you start to see the same names popping up, either in your comments or over on Substack Notes, but the same faces. There was a time when I had no idea who you were, Sally. Like, I hadn't encountered you, and then you were popping up on Notes. Some of your like posts would appear somewhere. I can't remember how that happened exactly or when it happened. There's people in the chat watching right now where it's the same, but there's a persistent interaction with people where you start to be like, oh, it's Sally or it's Scoot or and that's when suddenly it's a community rather than just a completely separate bunch of people. And like, there's things you can do with that, I think, as a writer, and if you're doing serial fiction, where you can kind of harness that a little bit, whether it's going old school, it'd be like having your own Discord channel where your readers can go and hang out, or you could use the chat feature on Substack to do a similar thing. You can send out posts that are specifically inviting discussion. So maybe it's not a fiction post, but you send something out and it's like a very short thing, and you're like, what do you think? And the whole point of that post is to get people to chat. And that can sort of break the floodgates a little bit, break the dam. I'm not sure what metaphor I was going for there. But that might make people more comfortable to then comment on other stuff. You can arrange live streams like this. The fact that we can have a nice chat is cool. And then people show up in the chat and you see, people who are in the chat who are here for earlier installments of this little mini series. And like all of that's really special because that kind of thing was really hard to manifest with fiction writing at all until recently. Like, you could go to a book festival or to a convention, and if you're a big name writer, you'd maybe have fan sites or something. But all of a sudden, we have the technology where you can like have long-term interactions with people, with interesting people. It's very exciting.
Oh yeah. That's, I mean, someone, I think it was maybe Ben, said in the chat, like the Substack has been life-changing. And I agree. I think it's an amazing place, and it does facilitate, there's so many tools. There's just so many tools that you can use to facilitate these kinds of conversations and to build that kind of stuff with your audience. And I think a huge aspect of that, as kind of like an undergirding part of that, would be to have as much gratitude as possible for the people who are with you at whatever stage you're at. Like, it's okay to strive for more. It's okay to want a certain amount of subscribers. It's okay to want some of these other things. But remember that there are people in your purview right now who love you and who are interested in what you have to say. And don't neglect them for the sake of wanting more, if that makes sense. Like, make sure that, like, you are engaging with the people who are already, with you, and just, I maybe this isn't like the most exciting way to do that, but I like to put out relatively regular housekeeping posts, where I just kind of sum up everything that's going on with me and things that I'm not, like my life necessarily, but just like writing wise, and things that I want people to be aware of. And just because I like the idea that if you're on Tailbones, we're all on the same page here about what's going on, and I think that can be a really good way, especially if you're trying to maintain growth. It can just be a really good way of making sure that everyone knows that, like, we're all here together enjoying this thing together. And here's a fun way for us all to be connected. And sometimes I like to, throw out like a giveaway or something, or like do something kind of fun just to shake things up a little bit. But it's mainly because I'm just so grateful that people even want to receive my stuff in their inbox. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that, because I think, if you have one reader, there was a time when you didn't have that reader, and then if you got 10 readers, or 100, or 1,000 readers, whatever the number is, it's pretty cool, like compared to whatever the number was a year previously. And I think because so much online culture is so obsessed with growth at all costs, and like that's the point of the whole exercise. If you're not growing, or if you're not growing fast enough, it can be a massive pressure and a source of stress or shame or some such. Or, you look at a writer and they've got 50,000 subscribers and you don't, and you're like, I'm not doing as well as them. And Substack doesn't help because it has these like bestseller lists and things that kind of ranks people, although I'm never entirely clear how that actually works. But we've talked a lot about growth in today's live stream, but which always makes me a little bit nervous. Hopefully, but the fact that we've said that it's really slow and takes years and you have to be patient, hopefully like counteracts the fact that we've said the word growth a few times. Because I think it probably shouldn't be the point. Because like we said earlier, if that is the point, then don't do it with fiction. Because it's just the most inefficient possible way to grow anything. But if you're writing cool fiction and you've got the time and patience, and you'd be writing the fiction anyway because you love doing it, then over time you will have some growth. Basically. I always like to encourage people to, when you're setting goals, I'm not saying, I know some people like to set milestones in certain places, but I would just say, if you're setting goals for yourself, don't make a sub count a goal, because a sub count is something that you can't control. Right? Goals should be things that you can control. It's how much you show up. It's how many words you write. It's finishing a certain project. It's these really tangible things that you can attain, right? You can have a dream
of how many subscriptions you want to have, that's great. I mean, we all probably have like a number in our heads of what we'd like to have or whatever. That's just a universal thing. But I worry when I see people say like, I've got this goal to reach this certain amount of subscribers by this certain date. And it's like, well, maybe that's not quite where the goalpost should be. Like that maybe the goalpost should be what you can do to continue to show up, to continue to grow as a writer. If the growth is internal, that is going to reflect externally in certain ways. Might not be massive subscriber growth all the time, but it will show in the quality of your work. It will show in just having a better sense of yourself as a person, as a writer, as an artist, as whatever it is that you're doing. The growth should be in your confidence, and the numbers are not going to make you more confident. I can guarantee you that having a higher subscriber count does not add to your confidence one iota. All it does, if you're not doing the inner work, all it does is just add pressure. So you should be doing the inner work and enjoying the process as you go, because that's going to matter more in the long run than whatever the numbers say.
Yeah. That seems like quite a nice place to stop. I think that all wrapped up quite nicely there. But yeah, hopefully that was useful and made sense. And I don't know. Hopefully it was kind of an optimistic thing. We haven't just put people off by going, "Oh, what it takes like a decade? What are you talking about?" Yeah. Hopefully no one tuned in for like quick growth hacks or anything, because that's not what you got.
No.
But yeah, I think we've probably got one more in this mini series, where we're going to be, for our sins, looking at monetization. Even as I say it, I'm like,
gross.
Yeah.
But necessary, I suppose, because it is just one of those inevitable questions of what do I do to A, make money as I'm serializing, and B, potentially make money after I'm done with the serial. So it's something to talk about.
Yes, yeah. So definitely lots of interesting stuff to talk about there. And spoiler, we're not going to be talking massive numbers there either.
Nope.
Right. Thank you everyone for joining in.
Millionaire. So.
No, exactly. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. The replay of this will go up. Where are we? That'll go up on Monday on my newsletter. So if you tuned in halfway, you can catch up on that. But yeah, thank you everyone, and have a good week. And if it's ridiculously hot where you are, stay cool somehow in whatever way is possible.
Fan on. I'm like,
yes, exactly. All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.